Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the UES Liberty, staring at the holographic message that had just arrived. The blue light from the projection cast strange shadows across his weathered face as he read the official summons. For the third time, his fingers drummed against the armrest, a habit he had picked up during his years, fighting in space battles that seemed impossible to win. The message was formal and cold, written in the standard galactic language that all species use for official business. It came from the Galactic Tribunal, the highest court in known space, and it was addressed directly to him. Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Fleet was being summoned to answer charges of war crimes and violations of civilized warfare. Protocols. The charges made him almost laugh out loud, but he kept his face serious as his crew watched him from their stations. Commander Lisa Hayes approached his chair, her boots making soft sounds on the metal deck. She had been his second in command for 3 years now, ever since the Battle of Kepler's Gate, where they had first worked together. Lisa was smart, tough, and one of the few people Jake trusted completely. She looked worried as she handed him a datapad with more information about the summons. "Sir, we've been monitoring galactic news feeds," Lisa said quietly, making sure the rest of the bridge crew could not hear her words. "The other species are calling this the trial of the century. They want to make an example out of you, out of all humans really." Jake nodded slowly, his eyes still focused on the holographic message floating in front of him. The charges were detailed and specific. Excessive use of primitive tactics during the Zephyrian War, endangering civilized warfare protocols through unconventional strategies, threatening galactic stability through barbaric military practices. Each charge carried a potential sentence of life imprisonment or worse. The truth was that Jake had expected something like this to happen eventually. Humans have been part of the galactic community for only 15 years, ever since first contact with the Altarian Republic. In that short time, humanity had gone from being seen as harmless newcomers to being feared as dangerous wildcards. Other species fought wars according to ancient rules and traditions that made battles more like formal dances than actual combat. Humans fought wars to win them as quickly as possible. Lieutenant Commander Bobby Chin, the ship's tactical officer, turned from his station with a grim expression. "Captain, we're receiving communication requests from Earth Command, the Altarian Embassy, and at least 6 news organizations. Word is spreading fast about the Tribunal summons." Jake stood up from his chair and walked to the main view screen, which showed the vast emptiness of space dotted with distant stars. Somewhere out there, representatives from 5 different alien species were preparing to judge him for the crime of being too good at his job. The irony was not lost on him. He had saved human colonies, protected civilian ships, and won battles that everyone said were impossible to win. Now he was being called a criminal for doing exactly what his government had trained him to do. "Lisa, set course for Concordia Station," Jake said, his voice carrying the authority that had made him one of Earth's most respected military commanders. "We're going to answer their summons." "Sir, with respect, maybe we should wait for orders." "From Earth Command," Lisa replied, concern clear in her voice. "This could be a trap. The Zephyrians lost a lot of ships and soldiers because of your tactics. They want revenge." Jake turned back to face his crew, and for a moment his expression softened. These people had followed him through impossible battles and never questioned his orders, even when those orders seemed crazy. They had trusted him when he told them to retreat at Kepler's Gate, only to turn around and attack from an unexpected angle. They had believed in him when he chose to cut supply lines instead of attacking fortified positions directly. Now they were worried about him, and he felt the weight of their loyalty. "The thing about traps," Jake said with a slight smile, "is that they only work if the person walking into them doesn't know it's a trap. I know exactly what this tribunal is really about, and it's not about justice or galactic law. It's about fear." He walked back to his command chair and sat down, his movements deliberate and calm. The other species in this galaxy have been fighting the same way for thousands of years. They have rules about how battles should be fought. when wars should start and stop, and what tactics are acceptable. Those rules keep everyone safe and predictable. Then humans showed up and started winning battles by breaking all their rules. Bobby Chun looked up from his tactical display. So they want to stop us from fighting our way? They want to put us back in our place, Jake answered. Make us fight like everyone else, slow and predictable and safe. But here's the thing they don't understand about humans. We don't like being told we can't do something, especially when that something is protecting our people and our worlds. The bridge was quiet for a moment as the crew absorbed their captain's words. Finally, Lisa spoke up again. What's the plan, sir? Jake's smile grew wider, and there was something in his eyes that his crew recognized from their most successful battles. It was the look he got when he had seen something that others had missed, when he had found a way to turn a desperate situation into a victory. We're going to give them exactly what they want, he said. A trial that everyone in the galaxy will remember. The Tribunal station was unlike anything Jake had ever seen, and he had visited many strange places during his years in space. The massive structure hung in orbit around the neutral world of Concordia like a giant metal flower, its 5 arms reaching out toward different points in space. Each arm belonged to one of the 5 species that made up the Galactic Tribunal, and each was built in the architectural style of its respective civilization. Jake stood at the observation deck of the transport shuttle that had brought him from his ship, watching the station grow larger as they approached. Beside him, Amanda Cross reviewed legal documents on her tablet, occasionally muttering under her breath about jurisdictional precedents and interspecies law. Amanda was Earth's best diplomatic lawyer, a sharp woman who had represented humanity in dozens of important negotiations since first contact. If anyone could navigate the complex legal system of the galactic community, it was her. The hearing chamber is located in the central hub, Amanda explained, pointing to the massive sphere at the center of the station where all 5 arms connected. It's designed to accommodate all 5 species comfortably, which means it's going to be huge and probably quite intimidating. That's intentional. Jake nodded, his attention focused on the docking procedures happening around them. Dozens of ships from different species were arriving for the trial, including several news vessels and diplomatic transports. The entire galaxy seemed interested in watching humanity's most successful military commander face judgment. Tell me about the judges, Jake said, settling into a seat as the shuttle began its final approach to the docking bay. Amanda pulled up holographic profiles of each tribunal member. The Vortic Hierarch is basically a living crystal formation that communicates through light patterns. Very old, very traditional, and not particularly fond of change. The Nethys Collective is a group consciousness made up of gas cloud entities that think in terms of consensus and harmony. The Saurian Chancellor represents the reptilian species that values honor and direct confrontation above all else. She swiped to the next profile. The Hive Queen of Kepler speaks for billions of insect-like creatures that operate as a single mind. Very logical, very efficient, and they see chaos as the ultimate enemy. Finally, there's the Luminar, which is pure energy contained in a force field shell. They're probably the most alien of all the species, and nobody really understands how they think. Jake studied each image carefully, noting details about their physical forms and the brief descriptions of their cultures. And they all agreed that I need to be put on trial? Unanimously, Amanda replied grimly. The Zephyrians filed the initial complaint, but all 5 tribunal species voted to hear the case. That almost never happens unless they consider something a serious threat to galactic stability. The shuttle docked with a soft thump, and within minutes Jake and Amanda were walking through corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. The walls were made of some kind of translucent material that showed the stars beyond, creating the impression of walking through space itself. Alien beings of various species moved through the corridors, many stopping to stare at the famous human captain who had caused so much trouble. When they reached the hearing chamber, Jake had to admit that Amanda had been right about it being intimidating. The room was enormous, with a dome ceiling that showed a real-time view of the galaxy spinning slowly overhead. 5 massive platforms were arranged in a circle around a central area where Jake would have to stand during the proceedings. Each platform was designed for a different species, with appropriate atmosphere, gravity, and environmental controls. The Vortic High Rocks platform looked like a crystalline garden, with geometric formations that sparkled with internal light. The Nethys Collective's area was filled with swirling gases and energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. The Saurian Chancellor sat on what appeared to be a throne made of polished stone, every line of his reptilian body speaking of predatory patience. The Hive Queen's platform buzzed with the movement of thousands of smaller creatures that formed patterns and shapes around their central ruler. The Luminar's area was simply a sphere of contained energy that pulsed with different colors. Jake walked to the central platform where defendants were required to stand during tribunal proceedings. The floor beneath his feet was transparent, giving him a clear view of the planet Concordia rotating slowly beneath the station. It was another psychological tactic designed to remind him how small and insignificant he was compared to the vast powers judging him. Captain Morrison, the Saurian Chancellor, spoke first, his voice amplified throughout the chamber by hidden speakers. You stand accused of violating the fundamental principles of civilized warfare. How do you answer these charges? Before Jake could respond, a new figure entered the chamber. Zephyrian War Prince Azif moved with the fluid grace of his aquatic species, his blue-green skin shimming under the chamber's lights. Azith had been the commanding officer of the Zephyrian fleet that Jake had defeated at Kepler's Gate, and the hatred in his large black eyes was obvious to everyone present. Honored judges, Azith began, his voice carrying the musical quality that all Zephyrians possess. This human has shown complete disregard for the laws that have kept our galaxy peaceful for millennia. His tactics are those of a savage, not a civilized being worthy of membership in our community. Jake listened calmly as Azit outlined the prosecution's case. According to the War Prince, Jake had committed 3 major violations of galactic warfare protocols. First, he had used deception and false retreats to lure enemy forces into traps, which violate the principle of honorable engagement. Second, he had targeted supply lines and support structures instead of engaging in direct fleet-to-fleet combat, which was considered cowardly by galactic standards. Third, he had coordinated attacks using civilian vessels and irregular forces, which endangered non-combatants and violated the separation between military and civilian populations. Each of these actions, as it continued, represents a fundamental rejection of the values that bind our galactic community together. If we allow such tactics to continue, we invite chaos and barbarism to replace the order we have worked so hard to maintain. The other judges listened silently, their alien features impossible for Jake to read. Amanda took notes furiously, occasionally glancing at Jake with worried expressions. She had warned him that the tribunal had probably already decided his fate before the hearing even began, and the formal tone of the proceedings seemed to confirm her fears. When Azith finished his opening statement, the Vortic Hierarch's crystalline form pulsed with soft light. Captain Morrison, you will have the opportunity to respond to these charges. However, we must inform you that the evidence against you is substantial and has been reviewed by all 5 member species. We advise you to consider the benefits of accepting responsibility for your actions and submitting to the tribunal's judgment. Jake stood quietly for a moment, looking up at each of the 5 alien judges in turn. Around the chamber, representatives from dozens of species watched him with curiosity and anticipation. News broadcasters from across the galaxy were recording every word and gesture. This was his moment to speak, and everyone was waiting to see what the famous human captain would say in his own defense. Instead of speaking immediately, Jake smiled. The smile on Jake's face seemed to unsettle the entire chamber, but he said nothing yet. Instead, he waited as the tribunal began presenting their evidence against him through massive, holographic displays that filled the air above the central Platform. The first display showed the Battle of Kepler's Gate in vivid detail, reconstructed from sensor data and battle recordings from both human and Zephyrian ships. War Prince Azif gestured toward the holographic battle as it played out. In slow motion, observe how the human fleet initially engaged our forces in what appeared to be standard formation combat. However, when our superior numbers began to tell, Morrison ordered what seemed to be a retreat. Our forces followed, as honor demanded, believing we were pursuing a defeated enemy. The hologram showed Jake's ships pulling back toward a dense asteroid field, with the larger Zephyrian fleet following in pursuit. What happened next had become famous throughout the galaxy, though different species interpreted it very differently. Instead of retreating, as it continued, his voice growing more angry, the human ships led us into a carefully prepared trap. Hidden mines had been placed throughout the asteroid field, activated by proximity sensors. When our fleet entered the field, Morrison's forces turned and attacked from multiple directions, while the mines destroyed dozens of our vessels. The Saurian Chancellor leaned forward on his stone throne. This is classic Predator behavior, not the conduct of a civilized military commander. In proper warfare, retreat means withdrawal from combat, not preparation for ambush. Jake watched the battle replay with interest, as if he were seeing it for the first time. Amanda shifted nervously beside him, but he remained calm and observant. When the hologram ended, he finally spoke. War Prince Azif is correct about the tactical sequence, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's amplification system. May I ask a question about Zephyrian military doctrine? The Vortic hierarch pulsed with light. You may ask, though the Tribunal will determine the relevance of your questions. War Prince, when your forces detected my ships retreating, what? Were your orders to your fleet commanders? Azif's eyes narrowed. To pursue and destroy the retreating enemy vessels, as honor and military protocol demanded. And if my ships had continued retreating without turning the fight, would you have followed us indefinitely? Of course not. There are protocols for pursuit that limit engagement parameters to prevent unnecessary escalation. Jake nodded thoughtfully. So your forces followed mine because your protocols told you that retreating enemies should be pursued, but only up to certain limits. Did those same protocols include any provisions for the possibility that the retreat might be tactical, rather than genuine? The chamber fell silent for a moment. Amanda looked up from her notes with surprise, realizing where Jake was going with his questions. War Prince Azif's skin color shifted slightly, a sign of discomfort among his species. Civilized species do not use false retreats, Azif replied stiffly. Such deception is beneath honorable commanders. The second holographic display activated, showing the siege of Proxima Station. This battle had lasted 6 months and had ended without a single shot being fired, which made it even more controversial than Kepler's Gate. The Hive Queen's platform buzzed with activity, as thousands of small creatures formed patterns that somehow conveyed meaning. A mechanical voice translated her thoughts. The human commander ignored the heavily fortified position and instead attacked supply convoys and logistics networks. This indirect approach prolonged the conflict unnecessarily and caused suffering among civilian populations. The hologram showed Jake's forces systematically intercepting cargo ships, destroying fuel depots, and cutting communication relays that supplied Proxima Station. Over the course of months, the Zephyrian garrison gradually ran out of supplies, ammunition, and eventually food. When they finally surrendered, they were weak and demoralized, but completely unharmed. This is not warfare, the Nephis Collective spoke through speakers that converted their gas cloud communications into audible words. This is slow strangulation. Honorable combat resolves disputes quickly and cleanly. This prolonged siege caused unnecessary hardship. Jake studied the holographic display carefully before responding. How many casualties resulted from the siege of Proxima Station? That is not the relevant question. The luminar pulsed with different colored lights that somehow conveyed meaning. The method matters more than the outcome. I disagree respectfully, Jake replied. The Zephyrian garrison at Proxima Station numbered approximately 12,000 soldiers. Intelligence reports suggested that a direct assault on their fortified position would have required at least 30,000 human troops and would have resulted in estimated casualties of 8 to 10,000 on both sides. Instead, the siege resulted in 0 combat deaths and approximately 200 cases of malnutrition that were treated immediately after surrender. Amanda made rapid notes as Jake spoke, beginning to understand his strategy. The third and final holographic display activated, showing the most controversial engagement of all. The Nebula Campaign. War Prince Azif gestured angrily at the swirling images of ships moving through the colorful gases of the Horsehead Nebula. This engagement represents the ultimate violation of civilized warfare principles. Morrison's forces used electronic jamming to disrupt communications, coordinated with civilian vessels to create false sensor readings and attack from 17 different vectors simultaneously. The result was complete chaos that made it impossible for our commanders to coordinate proper defensive responses. The hologram showed a battle that looked more like a dance than traditional fleet combat. Human ships appeared and disappeared in the nebula's gas clouds, striking quickly and vanishing before return fire could be coordinated. Civilian cargo haulers and passenger ships had been fitted with sensor spoofing equipment that made them appear to be military vessels on enemy scanners. The entire engagement lasted only 4 hours, but in that time the Zephyrian fleet was completely destroyed while human losses were minimal. This chaos warfare violates every principle of honorable combat, the Saurian Chancellor declared. How can civilized beings resolve disputes when the very nature of conflict becomes unpredictable and chaotic? Jake walked closer to the holographic display, studying the complex patterns of movement and engagement. May I ask the Tribunal a question? About the nature of warfare itself? The 5 judges exchanged whatever passed for glances among their various species. Finally, the Vortic hierarch pulsed with consent. You may ask your question. Why do civilized species fight wars? The question seemed to surprise everyone in the chamber. Amanda looked up sharply from her notes, and even War Prince as it seemed. Taken aback by the simplicity of the inquiry, the Nethys Collective responded first. Wars are fought to resolve disputes that cannot be settled through diplomatic means. They provide a mechanism for determining which position has merit when peaceful negotiation fails. And the goal of warfare is what exactly? Jake continued. To achieve victory in a manner consistent with honor and civilized principles. The Saurian Chancellor replied immediately. Jake nodded slowly. So the purpose of war is to win, but only if you win in the right way. Is that correct? The chamber grew quiet again. Jake's question seemed simple, but there was something about the way he asked him that suggested he was building toward a larger point. The alien judges appeared to be considering the implications of their own answers. The manner of victory matters as much as victory itself, the Hive Queen's mechanical voice declared. Chaos and unpredictability threaten the stability that allows civilized discourse to exist. Jake smiled again, and this time Amanda understood why. He was not just defending his tactics. He was questioning the entire foundation of galactic warfare. Doctrine. And from the expressions on the faces of the various species watching from the gallery, others were beginning to understand as well. Jake moved to the center of the platform, positioning himself so that he could see all 5 judges clearly. The holographic displays had been turned off, leaving the chamber lit only by the soft glow from the various alien environments and the stars, visible through the transparent dome overhead. Honored judges, Jake began, his voice steady and respectful. I want to thank War Prince Azif and the prosecution for their accurate description of my tactical decisions. Every charge they have brought against me is completely true. A murmur ran through the gallery as representatives from dozens of species reacted to this unexpected admission. Amanda looked shocked, her stylus frozen over her tablet. Even the alien judges seemed surprised by Jake's straightforward acceptance of the accusations. I did use false retreats to lure enemy forces into prepared positions, Jake continued. I did target supply lines instead of engaging in direct fleet combat. I did coordinate with civilian vessels and use electronic warfare to create chaos on the battlefield. These are all accurate statements of fact. War Prince Az's skin color shifted to a deeper blue, indicating confusion. Then you admit your guilt and submit to the Tribunal's judgment? No, Jake replied calmly. I admit to the facts, but I question whether those facts constitute crimes. To determine that, we need to examine why these tactics are considered wrong. By galactic standards. He walked toward the Saurian Chancellor's platform. Chancellor, your species values honor above all else. Can you tell me what makes a tactic honorable or dishonorable? The reptilian judge considered the question carefully. Honor comes from facing one's enemies directly, without deception or cowardice. A warrior proves his worth by defeating opponents in fair combat. And what purpose does this honor serve? Jake asked. Honor maintains the distinction between civilization and barbarism. It separates those who deserve respect from those who do not. Jake nodded and moved toward the Hive Queen's platform. Your Majesty, your species values order and predictability. What makes chaotic tactics wrong? The buzzing from the platform intensified as thousands of creatures form new patterns. The mechanical voice translated, chaos prevents rational decision-making and efficient resource allocation. Unpredictable tactics make it impossible to calculate optimal responses and achieve clean resolution of conflicts. So order serves the purpose of efficiency, Jake observed. Predictable warfare allows both sides to make rational decisions about resource allocation and strategic planning. He continued around the circle, asking similar questions of each judge. The Nethys Collective explained that their preference for consensus-based tactics reflected their belief that conflicts should be resolved in ways that all parties could understand and accept. The Vortic Hierarch spoke about tradition and the importance of maintaining customs that have been proven effective over thousands of years. The Luminar discussed balance and the need for conflicts to follow patterns that maintain universal stability. As Jake gathered these answers, Amanda began to see the structure of his defense. He was not arguing that his tactics were acceptable under current galactic law. Instead, he was building a case that galactic law itself was flawed. Now, let me ask a different question, Jake said, returning to the center of the platform. How long did the average galactic conflict last before humans joined the community? The question caught the judges off guard. After a moment of consultation, the Vortic Hierarch responded. Statistical analysis indicates that the average interspecies conflict lasted approximately 47 standard years. And what was the average casualty rate in those conflicts? Another pause for consultation. Approximately 12% of military personnel involved, with an additional 3% civilian casualties. Jake pulled out a datapad and began reading from it. Since humans joined the galactic community 15 years ago, we have been involved in 12 interspecies conflicts. The average duration of those conflicts was 8 months. The average casualty rate was less than 2% military and virtually zero civilian. The chamber grew very quiet as the implications of these statistics became clear. Jake had not just won battles more quickly than other species. He had won them with dramatically fewer casualties on both sides. Let me tell you about human military history, Jake continued. My species has been fighting wars for thousands of years, and we learned some important lessons. The most important lesson is that the best war is the one that ends quickly with the fewest people dying. He began walking around the platform again, but this time his movement seemed less formal and more like a teacher addressing students. Humans develop deceptive tactics not because we are dishonorable, but because deception can end fights before they become bloody. We learn to attack supply lines not because we are cowardly, but because armies that cannot eat or resupply cannot continue fighting. We use chaos and unpredictability not because we enjoy disorder, but because confused enemies make mistakes that cost fewer lives to exploit. War Prince Aziz stood up on his platform, his skin color now showing deep agitation. These justifications do not address the fundamental issue. Your tactics violate the principles that have maintained galactic peace for millennia. Have they maintained peace? Jake asked, turning to face the War Prince directly. Or have they maintained a system where conflicts drag on for decades, consuming resources and lives while benefiting no one except those who profit from prolonged warfare? The accusation hit the chamber like a physical blow. Amanda looked up from her notes with wide eyes, realizing that Jake had just accused the Galactic Tribunal system of perpetuating wars rather than ending them. That is a serious charge, Captain Morrison. The Luminar pulsed with colors that seemed to indicate warning. Do you have evidence to support such claims? Jake smiled and pulled out another datapad. I have spent considerable time studying galactic military history since receiving my summons to this tribunal. Would you like to know what I discovered? Without waiting for permission, he activated a holographic display that showed statistical charts and graphs. The 5 species represented on this tribunal have been involved in a total of 237 conflicts over the past 1,000 years. Of those conflicts, only 12 ended in less than 10 years. The average duration was indeed 47 years, but more interesting is the pattern of how they ended. The hologram shifted to show detailed breakdowns of individual conflicts. 83% of galactic conflicts end not through military victory, but through economic exhaustion. Both sides eventually run out of resources to continue fighting and negotiate settlements that leave the fundamental disputes unresolved. Within an average of 15 years, the same disputes flare up again under different pretexts. The judges listened in silence as Jake continued his analysis. This pattern suggests that galactic warfare is not designed to resolve conflicts, but to manage them. Your civilized tactics ensure that wars are fought in predictable ways that minimize decisive outcomes and maximize resource consumption. And you believe human tactics are superior because they end conflicts more quickly? The Saurian Chancellor asked, his voice showing the first hint of genuine curiosity rather than hostile judgment. I believe human tactics are more honest about what war actually is, Jake replied. War is not a game played by rules to determine who deserves respect. War is not a mechanism for efficient resource allocation. War is what happens when diplomacy fails, and people are going to die until someone wins decisively enough to stop the killing. He gestured toward the holographic displays showing his 3 famous battles. Every tactic I used was designed with one goal in mind: end the conflict as quickly as possible with the minimum loss of life. False retreats work because they cause enemies to make mistakes that expose their weaknesses. Supply line attacks work because armies without food surrender instead of fighting to the death. Chaos tactics work because confused enemies cannot coordinate effective resistance. The chamber remained silent as Jake concluded his defense. You call my methods primitive and barbaric, but they achieve something your civilized warfare has not managed in 1,000 years. They ended wars instead of prolonging them. The silence in the chamber stretched for several long moments after Jake finished speaking. The 5 alien judges seemed to be processing not just his words, but the implications of what he had revealed about their own military traditions. In the gallery, representatives from dozens of species leaned forward in their seats, clearly engaged by arguments they had never heard before. Finally, the Vortic Hierarch's crystalline form pulsed with a pattern of lights that seemed more complex than before. Captain Morrison, your analysis of galactic warfare statistics is intriguing, but you have not addressed the fundamental question of stability. Our methods may produce longer conflicts, but they also produce predictable outcomes that allow for long-term planning and resource management. Jake nodded respectfully. Your honor raises an important point about stability. May I ask who benefits from this predictable, long-term approach to warfare? All civilized species benefit from stability, the Nethys Collective responded through their translation system. Predictable conflicts allow for proper resource allocation, diplomatic planning, and maintenance of trade relationships even during times of war. Trade relationships during wartime, Jake repeated thoughtfully. That's interesting. Can the Tribunal provide information about economic activity during the average galactic conflict? Amanda looked up from her notes with sudden understanding. She had been wondering where Jake was going with his defense, and now she began to see the larger picture he was painting. After a brief consultation between the judges, the Hive Queen's mechanical voice provided the requested information. Economic analysis indicates that during periods of prolonged conflict, weapons manufacturing increases by an average of 400%. Strategic resource trading increases by 200%, and diplomatic consulting services increase by 600%. So wars are good for business, Jake observed. The longer a conflict lasts, the more money changes hands. The more predictable the conflict, the easier it is for various industries to plan their production and maximize profits. War Prince Aziz. Skin color shifted to an angry red. You are suggesting that our military traditions exist to benefit merchants and manufacturers. That is an insulting oversimplification of complex cultural values. I'm not questioning your cultural values, War Prince, Jake replied calmly. I'm questioning whether those values are being used by others for purposes you might not approve of. Let me show you something interesting I discovered in my research. Jake activated another holographic display that showed a complex network diagram. This chart shows the ownership structure of the major weapons manufacturing companies, strategic, resource extraction operations, and diplomatic consulting firms that serve the galactic community. What's interesting is how interconnected they are. The hologram highlighted connections between companies, showing how the same investors and management groups controlled multiple aspects of the war economy. 73% of galactic warfare-related industries are controlled by just 15 major investment groups. These groups have representatives on the advisory councils that help establish military protocols and conflict resolution procedures. The chamber erupted in murmurs and exclamations as representatives from various species recognized names and connections on the display. Even some of the judges seemed surprised by the extent of the economic networks Jake had uncovered. Are you suggesting that our military traditions have been deliberately shaped to maximize profits for these investment groups? The Saurian Chancellor asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. I'm suggesting that traditions, no matter how honorable their origins, can be corrupted over time if there are powerful interests that benefit from maintaining them, Jake replied. Let me give you a specific example. The holographic display changed to show detailed records from the recent Zephyrian-Altarian border conflict, which had lasted 31 years before ending in a negotiated settlement that resolved nothing. This conflict followed all proper galactic warfare protocols, Jake explained. Formal declarations, ritualized engagements, respect for civilian populations, and predictable tactical approaches. Both sides fought honorably according to established traditions. The result was 3 decades of low-intensity warfare that consumed enormous resources and killed over 2 million people, but changed nothing about the original border dispute. He gestured to specific data points on the display. During those 31 years, weapon sales to both sides totaled over 40 billion galactic credits. Strategic resource extraction to support the war effort generated another 60 billion credits in trade. Diplomatic consultant and mediation services added another 15 billion credits. The total economic activity generated by this single conflict exceeded the gross domestic product of most member species. The implications were becoming clear to everyone in the chamber. Jake was not just defending his tactical choices. He was exposing a system that turned warfare into a profitable industry. Now look at what happened when humans became involved in similar conflicts, Jake continued, bringing up new data. The Kepler boundary dispute had been ongoing for 18 years when Earth forces were asked to mediate. Using tactics similar to those I'm being tried for today, we resolved the dispute in 6 months with fewer than 300 total casualties. The hologram showed the economic impact of the quick resolution. Weapon sales during those 6 months totaled less than 50 million credits. Strategic resource trading was minimal. Diplomatic consulting was unnecessary because the conflict ended before complex negotiations were required. The total economic activity was less than 1% of what a traditional galactic conflict would have generated. War Prince Aziz stood again, his movement sharp with agitation. Even if your economic analysis is correct, that does not justify abandoning the principles that have maintained order in our galaxy for millennia. I'm not asking anyone to abandon their principles, Jake replied. I'm asking you to consider whether some of your principles might have been hijacked by people who profit from their application. He walked toward the center of the platform again, his voice taking on a more personal tone. Every species represented in this chamber has honorable military traditions that deserve respect. Saurian concepts of direct confrontation and personal courage are admirable. Zephyrian emphasis on fluid tactics and adaptive strategy shows great wisdom. Vortic respect for proven methods provides valuable stability. Nethi's commitment to consensus building promotes understanding between different cultures. Hive Queen. Dedication to logical analysis ensures efficient resource use. Jake paused, looking up at each judge in turn. But somewhere along the way, these honorable principles got twisted into a system that prolongs conflicts instead of ending them. A system that turns warfare into an economic activity instead of a last resort for resolving disputes. The Luminar pulsed with colors that seemed to indicate deep thought. If your analysis is correct, Captain Morrison, then changing our approach to warfare would have significant economic consequences throughout the galactic community. Yes, it would, Jake agreed. Industries that depend on prolonged conflicts would have to find other ways to generate revenue. Investment groups that profit from predictable warfare patterns would have to adapt to more volatile markets. Some very powerful interests would be disrupted. He smiled again, and this time there was something predatory in his expression. Which brings us to the real reason I'm standing trial today. This isn't about my tactical choices or violations of military protocol. This is about preventing the spread of ideas that threaten a very profitable status quo. The tribunal recessed for 3 days to deliberate, during which Jake remained on the station as required by galactic law. Amanda spent most of that time trying to prepare for various possible outcomes, while Jake seemed remarkably calm for someone whose life hung in the balance. He spent his time reading, exercising in the station's recreation facilities, and having quiet conversations with various species representatives who approached him in the corridors. On the 3rd day, Jake received an unexpected visitor in his temporary quarters. Commander Lisa Hayes had arrived from the Liberty, along with Lieutenant Commander Bobby Chien and several other members of his crew. "Sir, we couldn't just sit on the ship while you were in there fighting for your life," Lisa explained as they gathered in the small meeting room adjacent to Jake's quarters. "Besides, there are some things happening that you need to know about." Bobby pulled out a datapad and activated a secure communication link. "Captain, we've been monitoring galactic communication networks during the trial. Your defense speeches have been broadcast across hundreds of systems, and the response has been incredible. The displays show communication traffic statistics from across the galaxy. Military academies on 17 different worlds have requested copies of your tactical analyses. The Andromedans have officially announced that they're revising their military doctrine to incorporate what they call efficiency-based warfare principles. Even some Zephyrian commanders have been asking questions about human tactical methods." Jake studied the data with interest, but his expression remained calm. "What about the economic networks I exposed? Any reaction from those quarters?" Lisa nodded grimly. "Oh, yes, sir. There's been a lot of reaction. Several of the major investment groups have issued statements denouncing your reckless accusations and calling for severe punishment to discourage other species from adopting destabilizing military practices." "They're scared," Bobby added. "Your analysis hit closer to home than they expected." Some of the smaller species that aren't part of the tribunal system are starting to ask uncomfortable questions about why. Their conflicts always seem to drag on for decades without resolution. Jake smiled, and his crew recognized the expression that had preceded some of his most successful operations. Good. That means the plan is working. Amanda looked up from her legal documents with confusion. What plan? Jake, we need to focus. On your defense. The tribunal reconvenes in 6 hours, and I still don't know how we're going to convince them not to execute you. Amanda, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but this was never about convincing the tribunal to let me go, Jake replied. This was about using the trial as a platform to spread ideas that needed to be heard across the galaxy. The room fell silent as the implications of Jake's statement became clear. Lisa was the first to speak. Sir, are you saying you knew they? We're going to find you guilty before the trial even started. Of course they're going to find me guilty, Jake answered. The tribunal system exists to maintain the status quo, and I represent a fundamental threat to that status quo. They can't let me walk away without punishment, because that would validate everything I've said about their system being flawed. Bobby leaned forward in his chair. Then why did you come here? Why didn't you just refuse the summons and force them to arrest you? Because an arrest would have been a private matter handled through diplomatic channels, Jake explained. A public trial, broadcast across the galaxy, gives me the opportunity to present evidence and arguments that otherwise would never see the light of day. Sometimes you have to lose a battle to win a war. Amanda shook her head in disbelief. Jake, they're talking about execution. This isn't some chess game where you can sacrifice pieces for strategic advantage. This is your life. Jake's expression softened as he looked at his lawyer and friend. Amanda, do you remember what you told me about the economic interests that benefit from prolonged warfare? How powerful those investment groups are. How much influence they have over galactic policy. Yes, but what does that have to do with? Those interests can't be challenged through normal legal or diplomatic channels because they control too much of the existing system, Jake continued. The only way to fight them is to expose them publicly and give other species the tools they need to break free from the cycle of profitable warfare. Lisa stood up and began pacing around the small room. Sir, with respect, that's a noble goal, but it doesn't require you to die for it. There has to be another way. Maybe there is, Jake replied, but this way guarantees that the message gets heard. Every species in the galaxy is watching this trial. They've heard my analysis of galactic warfare economics. They've seen the evidence of how prolonged conflicts benefit investment groups at the expense of everyone else. Most importantly, they've learned that there are alternative approaches to warfare that can end conflicts quickly and save lives. Door chimed, indicating that it was time for Jake to return to the tribunal chamber for the verdict. As he stood up and straightened his uniform, his crew gathered around him with expressions of pride mixed with sadness. Whatever happens in there, sir, you should know that you've already changed things, Bobby said quietly. The communications we've been monitoring show that military commanders across the galaxy are rethinking their approaches to conflict resolution. Jake nodded and headed toward the door, then paused and turned back to his crew. Lisa, I want you to take command of the Liberty and continue the work we started. The tactical innovations we developed together need to be shared with any species that wants to learn. Bobby, I want you to work with Earth Command to establish a military training program for allied species. Amanda, there are legal challenges coming that will make this trial look simple. When Jake entered the tribunal chamber for the final time, he found it packed with representatives from across the galaxy. News broadcasters, diplomatic observers, military attaches, and civilian spectators filled every available space. The 5 alien judges took their positions on their respective platforms, their alien features impossible to read. The Vortic Hierarch spoke first, his crystalline form pulsing with formal patterns of light. Captain Morrison, this tribunal has carefully considered the evidence and arguments presented during these proceedings. We find you guilty of all charges brought against you by the Zephyrian Empire. A murmur ran through the chamber, But Jake's expression did not change. He stood calmly in the center of the platform, hands clasped behind his back, waiting for the sentence to be announced. However, the hierarch continued, and the chamber fell completely silent. This tribunal also acknowledges that your arguments regarding the effectiveness of human military doctrine have merit. After extensive deliberation, we have concluded that the interests of galactic stability would not be served by your execution. Jake's smile returned, broader than ever before. In the gallery, Amanda and his crew looked stunned by the unexpected reprieve. The sentence of this tribunal is immediate release and full restoration of your military command, with the condition that you establish a joint training program to share human, tactical innovations with interested member species. As Jake walked out of the tribunal chamber a free man, he was surrounded by representatives from dozens of species eager to learn about human military methods. Amanda caught up with him in the corridor, still looking shocked by the verdict. "Jake, what just happened in there? I thought you said they would never let you go free." Jake's smile was wider than she had ever seen it. "Amanda, they didn't let me go free because they wanted to. They let me go free because they realized that executing me would prove everything I said about their system being corrupt and self-serving. My death would have made me a martyr and validated my arguments about galactic warfare being designed to benefit investment groups rather than resolve conflicts." He gestured toward the crowd of alien representatives following them down the corridor. "But more importantly, they realize that it's already too late to stop the ideas I've spread. Military commanders across the galaxy are already adopting human tactical methods. The old system of prolonged, profitable warfare is breaking down whether they execute me or not." As they walked toward the docking bay where the shuttle waited to take them back to the Liberty, Jake reflected on what had been accomplished. He had not just survived his trial. He had used it to fundamentally change how the galaxy thought about warfare and conflict resolution. The age of ritualized, prolonged conflicts designed to maximize profits was ending. The age of efficient, decisive military action designed to save lives and resolve disputes was beginning. And Jake Morrison, the human who had faced the tribunal and walked out smiling, had played his part in making it happen.